So I think that it's really important to discuss probate because there are a lot of misconceptions about what it is. 100%. And a lot of people go into, why should I avoid this? I hear about that I should avoid this, but
what is
why? Yeah, they don't even know what it is. So
right.
I think first and foremost.
How would you define
how would you actually define? Exactly. I think a simple explanation would be a court process by which the court allocates your assets and debts. And I think a lot of people believe that this may be a necessary process or that everyone has to go through this process when in reality they don't.
Right.
Or they've had this horror story of, oh, we need to avoid probate. We have to avoid this probate process. And now that we've defined it of what is probate, we need to get into why you should avoid it. Because yes, it's a court process.
But why? Why should they avoid it? Is it timely? Is it expensive? Why do people hate it?
Right. And it's all of those things. After you lost a loved one, you don't want to have to deal with me or you, right? You want to deal with the grief process. You want to deal with other family, maybe not. But you don't want to deal with people like us, even though we're very lovely people.
Of course. We try to make it as easy as possible, right? But still.
No, you don't want to be at a law office. You don't have to be dealing with all of this mess. You want to be able to grieve properly and have everything in order so that you can grieve properly.
Can people do it on their own?
Sure. I mean, you can do anything on your own, right? But I wouldn't file a lawsuit on my own if I wasn't in that area. I mean, if I got some sort of criminal misconduct, I'm not going to do it on my own, even though I could. Even as an attorney, I wouldn't. Just like I wouldn't go through a probate process on my own if it wasn't my type of law.
And how long are they looking at? Like when they say, oh, I have to go through probate, is it 30 days? Is it 3 years?
Right. And I think that's the other misconception is we don't know. We don't know until we get into it because it's based on a lot of things. It's based on, did you have a trust? It's based on what's the value of your assets? How many people are going to fight? We don't know any of that. So when people say, what is this going to cost? How long is this going to take? I can't really tell you until we get into it. And that's the other part that's disconcerting is now you've lost a loved one and now it's really unknown what the future of cost and timing is.
Right. And I think from my experience, what people don't understand is when they're in probate, like they can't do anything with those assets. Like if the deceased person owned a house, you can't do anything with that house unless the court blesses it and you're going through this process.
Right. In most cases, that's 100% true. Or even worse, a business.
Right.
If we want to talk about horror stories, you have a business and let's say you're the sole person. Let's say it's a service industry based business. So you're a carpet installer, you're a remodeler, you have a contractor's license. Your business fails.
Right.
Because there's no one else to do it. Or if you're the qualified employee, business fails. I mean, you have a grace period, but a lot of the time you can't even get appointed by the court for a month or so.
Right.
So what are you doing in that month?
And you can't pay bills unless somebody else is on the account. There's a lot of different things.
Yeah. And I think people don't think about that.
Right. And so there's ways to prevent that in
Entirely.
your operating agreement.
Right.
Well, we could talk about that just in general, not just in the business context. Like, how do you go about the process of avoiding probate?
Right. And there are several different ways, which we could go into, but it's going to be unique to each individual.
Right.
Right. So we always say the four main ones, right? Not owning anything. I don't have to go through probate if I don't own anything.
Not always the option everyone likes.
No, we don't like that option. Usually we want to own.
You have a third eye.
Yes.
Like, I don't want to own anything. I've spent my whole life.
I built all of this and now you're telling me not. No. That only works in very certain circumstances. But of course it is an option. If I don't own anything.
And it's an option. And like we've told people before, like think about it during your lifetime. You have something special. You want somebody particular to have. Give it to them during their life. See them appreciate that.
Right.
You know, see the joy on their face because they got it and they will always think of you for that. Exactly. Instead of wait till they see some document and hope that they can find that
document that you told them or try to persuade the other heirs that, well, she told me that I was going to get this.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, we have no proof of any of that. So and you know, we've seen people fight over and this is the part that I think people get really, I think they are very cautious, maybe not even cautious. I don't think they give enough weight to of personal property. So how many times have you heard a client say, I don't care. I don't care who has it. And to an extent, I'm dead. And to an extent, that's true, right? To an extent, I don't care who gets my stuff.
Right.
But the reason that people estate plan to avoid the probate process is to avoid fighting, to avoid that headache, to take care essentially of your loved ones after death.
Right.
And if you wanted to do that by estate planning, you should still care. And people think I'm crazy when I say, think of personal property because they think it's worth nothing.
Right.
They're like, oh, who wants my furniture? Who wants my whatever it is?
Right. None of my artwork cost anything. It didn't mean anything.
Yeah. And what have we seen? Yes. The most contentious probates always revolve around money, of course, but oddly enough are around really odd things.
Right.
So ice cube trays, mattresses, magnet collections.
Right.
Things that are on the front not worth really anything, but sentimental value is huge.
Huge.
And people really neglect that, I think.
Right.
Which is not great, but it's something that people should think about and a lot of times don't.
Right.
But if we want to circle back to probate horror stories, if we talk about documents that fail. So first and foremost, there are ways to avoid probate, which we talked about, one, not owning anything. The second option would be to jointly own, right? So if husband and wife are on a house, they jointly own it.
Joint tenants with right of survivorship.
Yep.
Yep.
One of them passes away.
The other gets it.
The other gets it. And what does that usually signify to that spouse? Why is that a problem with joint tenancy?
If you both die together.
If you both die together, or when the first spouse was like, oh, I didn't see any problems. Nothing changed when my spouse passed. Why do I need to plan?
Yes.
And they don't know the reason that nothing changes because they had everything held as joint tenants.
Right.
So it worked really well
one.
for the first person.
Right.
And then we fall into the probate section for the second. And unfortunately, I think probate is a process that skips generations because when one generation plans properly, it was so easy for them and they don't realize why it was so easy.
Right.
So then they don't plan and then their children have to suffer the consequences of probate.
Right.
Instead of
It
being of the prior
easy.
generation of having it all set out. So circling back to joint tenants, of course, it works really well if you don't pass away together, but it only works well for that first person's passing. Yeah. And then the third option that we usually recommend, beneficiaries. Yep. So in Nevada, we have the ability to put beneficiaries on almost everything.
Almost everything.
Except what?
Businesses.
Businesses.
Business interests.
Business interests, yeah. So you can't put beneficial interests in the state of Nevada on businesses, which is really a huge asset to a lot of people.
100%.
It's their kid without actually being their kid.
Right.
They've grown it.
livelihood.
It's everything. And so that's really important to acknowledge that while beneficiary designations are payable on death, transfer on death designations, in other words, they can't work for every situation.
Right.
And what is another reason why you don't always recommend only naming a beneficiary?
Well, because you can't do any planning for what happens if that beneficiary would happen to predecease you, or if that beneficiary is underage, is it a minor at this stage? What if you don't want them to get it all until a certain age limit, or if they meet certain criteria that you've set out? You can't do anything with a beneficiary designation.
Right. As soon as it's named, they get it.
They get it.
Which is also concerning if it's a child that is now being taken care of by a non-relative. Yes. So let's say that your son got married and passed away, and now you have a grandchild.
Yep.
You want to leave everything to the grandchild, but you don't want mom to control it.
Right.
You do a beneficiary designation. Unfortunately, that's where you are.
The guardian's going to control it.
Yep.
Right.
So it's a good option, and it does work for certain people, but it's not always the best option.
Right.
And then that leaves us to the fourth option, which is a trust.
Yes.
And for purposes of estate planning, we usually just talk about revocable family trusts. While there are many different types of trusts, revocable family trusts are what the majority of people are using because that's what we use to simply avoid probate in most cases.
Right. Which is usually people's concern.
Right.
I don't want my family to go through this process.
Right.
And kind of to your point, it skips a generation. We have so many people in. I just went through this for my parents. I don't want my kids to have to go through this.
Right.
Or I'm taking care of it for my sister, my uncle. I don't want my family to go through this.
Right, because it's a terrible process. I
Right.
mean, circling back to what you said, not only is it time consuming, but you're dealing with attorneys and you're losing money.
Right.
But there is the misconception, and people talk about this all the time. I don't want the state to get my money.
Yes.
Is the state going to get people's money?
No.
Well,
Okay, fair. A typical attorney answer, right? It depends.
it depends. But in most cases.
No, in most cases, it's not. There is my favorite word from law school, the tree of consanguinity.
Yes.
And it explains who gets people's money after they pass. And it,
Right.
you know, it usually goes how you would think it would. Spouse, kids, no kids, parents, no parents, brothers, sisters.
Right.
You know, how you think. And it goes out 6 degrees.
I mean,
really
as far down as you need it to
as
go.
they can try to find somebody to give your money to. There's
Yeah.
very, very rare situations where they can't find anybody that has any relation to you, and then it could go to the state. But it's
Exactly.
a very rare situation.
Very rare.
Yeah.
And so what we like to say is instead of, oh, I'm concerned about the state getting my money, it's more a question of, do you want the state to determine where your money goes?
Perfect.
Because that is true. By
Yes.
statute, there are statutes that say if you pass away without a will, this is who will inherit.
This who gets it.
And sometimes it makes sense, right? Because you just said, maybe I do want it to go to my spouse. I do want it to go to my kids. And that makes sense. But what happens when there's an estranged child? What if there's a child that you didn't know about?
Right.
What if there is a brother or sister you want no part of getting any of your money?
100%.
I mean, then it's really important to plan properly. And then that's going to bring us to another misconception, which is if you have a will, then you avoid probate.
No,
Is that true?
it is definitely not true.
Why?
Because a will is actually just you telling the court, so you're in probate, and the probate court decides what assets you have, what debts you have, what's left to give to your beneficiaries. And then instead of looking at the statute of who to give the money to, they look at your will. But you're already in probate at that stage. It just doesn't go according to how the state sets it up. It goes to who you want it to. But you still have to go through that whole process.
Exactly. And so I'm a big fan of wills. I think everyone should still have one because there are some things that you can't put in a trust.
Right?
For instance, future lawsuits. So if I passed away and there was a lawsuit that my estate needed to bring, that's still going to go through probate. And we can't avoid that. You can't avoid that ever because it didn't happen until after your death. So you couldn't have put it in the trust because it didn't exist until after death. So a will is still very important when you're talking about having one or not having one. But in the perfect world, we don't ever use your will. You file it and then you're done because you have other things set up to bypass that probate court process whereby your will would be needed.
Correct.
So we have it as a just in case.
Just a safety net.
But when people always come in and say, I have to have a will, I don't have a will, the state's going to get my money. One, we want you to have a will, but we hope that you don't need it.
Right.
And two, the will's not going to bypass probate even if you have it.
Right.
So that's kind of a big misconception. And that's probably the number one misconception that people come into the office and say, oh, I need a will so I can avoid probate. Well, you don't really need a will for that purpose, but you do need it for the purpose of should something have to go through the court, where does it go?
And that leads to kind of a more advanced question. But what happens if you have a trust and then you have a will and it names people and not your trust?
Right.
Like, what happens that like your documents don't agree? You haven't done a thorough estate plan. You've just done one-offs here and there.
Yeah, and that kind of echoes some of these horror stories, right? Is that I have a trust and I have that I want everything to go to my trust and that's what I believe will happen, except I didn't put anything in my trust.
Right.
And then I did it myself or I did it online or I did it with somebody that may not have known what they were doing. And I have a will that says it goes to these people, but they're not the same people in the trust. Well, if it's dated after and it's not in the trust already and it's going through probate court, it's going to go pursuant to your will.
Right.
So you need to make sure that if you have documents, they're done properly and that you are constantly looking at them to update them in case you have a falling out, there's a divorce, there's a death, who knows?
Right.
And if we just want to kind of spitball all these horror stories that we've heard, the first one that always comes to mind is a son who was estranged from two of his kids, didn't have a will, had a very, very, very successful flooring company, like millions of dollars. Because he didn't have a will, the business went under. And because he didn't have a will, his two estranged children got everything. And so, I mean, that's terrible.
That's not what he would have wanted.
That's not
when
at
you
all.
asked him 2 days before his passing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, so that's the first one. The second one is documents that are done improperly. So they did their document themselves, or they did it online, or they did it, whatever they did.
Right.
And they'll say something like, I want everything to go to my estate. Why would you say you want everything? That's not doing anything.
Right.
So you're forcing a probate where you could have avoided a probate.
Right.
Or you have this best friend, you've been estranged from your family for years. You have this best friend you want to leave everything to. So you do this document that you think is going to be valid.
Right.
And because it doesn't meet their requirements,
They get nothing.
it goes to your estranged family and they get nothing.
And that's situations like long-term relationships, domestic partners, things like that. If you're not in a traditional marriage, the courts doesn't reflect.
Right.
Like if you just go through and
Domestic partnerships, as long as they're registered.
If they're
is different.
registered,
But if
right.
you just think, we've been
Boyfriend,
together for
girlfriend.
30 years.
right.
Don't I get something? You don't. And we'll see that a lot too.
Yep.
Is, well, I thought we've been together. Don't we have common law marriage? No, not in the state of Nevada.
Right.
If you were here and we don't have common law marriage. It doesn't matter how long you were together.
Right.
You're not going to have any rights to this unless you can prove you put money in, and then it gets really, really
have to fight.
messy. Yes,
You're gonna
have to fight. It's an uphill battle, and you've lost your partner of 20, 30 years.
Yes.
It's not a situation that anyone would want to be in.
Or would you want to leave your significant other in that situation? If you happen to pass first, you're like, well, you get nothing. Think of it if you're in the house, you're living in their house. Well, all of a sudden
You get kicked out.
you get kicked out.
Yeah.
And we've had that horror stories.
Many times, actually.
Right.
It's very unfortunate, and it's unfortunate because it's just a lack of knowledge.
Right.
Because if people had known this prior, and hopefully that this is what this will do, is inform people of, if you're in one of these situations, I mean, really everyone should plan, because no one is going to survive life.
Right.
Right?
Right.
In the end, we're all
100%.
going to be in the same spot.
Exactly.
Whether we want to come to terms with that or not, it's going to happen. And
Right.
people are very frequently like, I don't have anything.
Right.
Well, do you have a house? Well, yeah, I just have a house. Do you have a car? Well, yeah, I have a car. Do you have a bank account? Yeah, you have a lot.
Right.
I mean, having
Those
nothing
things.
would have none of those things.
Right.
And which goes back to our how to avoid probate by not having anything. And some people don't. Some
Right.
people rent and have their kids take care of everything, and they don't have anything. And in that case, you don't have
might be
anything.
the same.
Right.
It might be correct.
It might be correct. But in most cases, when people come to us and they say, oh, I don't really have anything.
Right.
You don't? You
Right.
do. You have a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So it's
I'm
you know,
not rich. I don't
not
need
rich,
one.
right.
It
And that's
doesn't
the
matter.
misconception, is that trusts are only for rich people.
Exactly.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Some trusts may be that, but our standard
100%.
revocable trust is for the standard person.
They just avoid probate.
They avoid probate and allow you to allocate your assets according to your desires.
The other thing we get, sometimes we always wonder, we talk back and forth about why are people not doing their trust? Like what's preventing them? Is it a time thing? We're on everyone's list, I think.
We
They're
are.
like,
We
woo,
are.
you were on
we were
the
gonna
list.
get to you. We were
We're
going to
get
get
to you. Or, it could be a cost thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my response to that always is, you're paying one way or another.
You are.
You're either going to pay up front and we're going to avoid the probate process, or you're going to have to hire an attorney to go through the probate process for you.
Right. Your loved ones are going to have to deal with it.
Your loved ones are going to have to.
And that's exactly what it is.
So somebody's paying.
Yeah. Do you want to be responsible for it, or do you want to make your loved ones responsible for it?
Right.
And I'm on the education end where we tell people all the time, if you don't want to use us, don't use us.
100%.
Use someone.
Right.
Because we don't want to have to be on the other end of it. I would rather much be on the estate planning side of things than the probate side of things.
We're going to get you one way or another.
I just-
Somebody is.
Right. You're gonna end up here somehow. So for the sake of the people you leave behind, plan properly.
Correct.
Because it is a miserable process to go through.
100%. And we see that, we see it on the probate side. And if they just would have put a little time into doing the trust up front or properly funding it. That's the other thing you talked about before. So our reference always is a water bottle. We help make the water bottle, but you got to put the water in it. And then when you pass, your trustee pours the water out.
Yep.
You distribute the assets.
Exactly.
A lot of times, so we help people put their main asset. They're usually worried about their house. So we can help them put that into the trust.
Right.
We do that for them.
Yes.
But all their other assets, potentially they have to do on their own. They have to
Right.
call them up and say, I need this. I need the beneficiary of my trust. I need to put this in my trust. How do I do this?
Mm-hmm.
To make sure that it gets done.
Right. Because a lot of people, and people will come to us and say, no one ever told us. No one ever
Right.
told us we needed to do that. Whether that's true or not, I'm not going to speak for other attorneys, but we make it a point to
Yes.
go through, and we even make our clients sign saying, we know we need to do this.
Right.
Because it's so important. We're not here to take money and hand you pieces of paper. We're
Right.
here to help you plan properly.
Right.
And we're going to do whatever we can to make sure that after we prepare the document, you fund it properly, like you just said.
Yep.
And you're also updating it. Because how many
100%.
times do we see documents that are out of date?
Oh,
That
all the
person has
time.
passed away. I don't have a relationship with that person anymore. Or I don't have that asset. A lot of the times we don't care about what assets you do or don't have.
100%.
But people passing or relationships changing is huge.
100%. Or, they have a kid now. Now we have to think about grandkids. Where do you want this to go?
Mm-hmm.
Or, somebody passed. Somebody's now married. Oh, what does that bring into the relationship?
Right. Exactly. And I think that people don't update it, and I don't think they fund it. And I think those are the two main things that we see with trusts, at least, irrespective of probate process.
Right.
Of even if the trust works, you still want to make sure it's an ongoing document. We need to keep up, especially, we're talking about, again, revocable trusts, ones that you can change.
Right.
You have to keep up to date on those. We just want to make sure that what you have down is what actually happens. But oddly enough, what we see a lot of also, which is odd, is people will make an appointment with us to
Yes.
come do estate planning, and then what happens? Somebody has passed away in the meantime.
Yes.
Or the person that they were trying to plan for has passed away.
Yep.
And that's what we're talking about when we say it's going to happen. So don't put it off.
Don't wait that.
Don't wait.
Right.
Don't wait. You don't want to be in a position where you're either rushing to do something or, we're getting to the end. And some of these people didn't even know, car accidents.
Yeah.
Nobody is promised tomorrow.
Right.
And we get into this position where we think we're invincible. I'm too young to do this.
Right.
I'm too young to do. Are you? Do you drive a car?
Right. In Vegas,
yes.
especially. Right.
Right. I'm venting. I'm tempting fate every time I get in that car.
For sure.
Right.
Yes.
So I think that's just, to kind of close it out, I think there are a lot of misconceptions about probate, and there are a lot of misconceptions about wills and trusts.
Mm-hmm.
And the end goal is to plan properly to make it less burdensome for the people you leave behind.
100%.